your statement that the R&D in clean energy around the world, the vast majority of the funding, 80%, comes from government, 20% industry.
Exactly.
That's worldwide. What about here in the United States? Is that breakdown still about the same, about an 80-20, that we're not seeing the R&D in clean technology development?
I need to come back to you for that, Madam Chair, but worldwide, it was, for me at least, a surprising result.
Yeah, that is.
I thought when I read the interviews of the business leaders and so on, I thought it was the biggest part was coming from the industry and less from the public, but public was the main driver of the R&D in clean energy.
Well, it's very interesting. If you learn otherwise, and particularly on the U.S. side, I'd be curious to know about that, because that is that's not what typically
exactly.
we would think. You have referenced energy security many times, and we think about the security that comes with abundance of supply and how we can provide security that way. You've also referenced the kind of the electrification that we're seeing around the world. You highlight in your testimony the increasing digitalization of power systems, and again, that can assist with levels of efficiency that I think is important. But I think we also recognize that with these opportunities, it can bring challenges, certainly when it comes to the issue of cybersecurity. You haven't really mentioned the role that plays with these interconnected energy systems. Can you just speak a little bit as to how you think digitalization provides levels of benefit but also vulnerabilities?
In fact, it's an area that we just started to work, Madam Chair, very important, because digitalization and energy, they are becoming more and more interwoven. We recently made a report, and my colleague Dave Turk, from the former U.S. government official who recently joined our organization, was leading that work. What we have seen is that digitalization provides a lot of benefits. By increasing the efficiency of our systems, we save a lot of money. We save a lot of activity, and we need to build, for example, less power plants than it otherwise would need it. As a result of digitalization, we are reducing the demand and improving our power system. This is very good, and this is something that will continue. With it would help us to make, for example, the most out of the renewable energies as well. I mentioned that there is a mismatch between when the sun and wind are available and when the electricity demand is the highest. So digitalization will help to address this mismatch as well. Now, but this is, on one hand, this is very good that our energy system, our economic system is becoming more and more digital, more and more interconnected through different devices. But this also raised the issue of cybersecurity, as the surface attack is becoming much bigger in terms of the unexpected disruptions. So it is an area that we are working with our governments, how we can increase the resilience of our electricity systems in order to minimize such attacks. What kind of measures, regulatory and technical measures, need to be taken in order to minimize the undesired effects of digitalization in terms of making our systems more vulnerable. This is a serious issue with the electrification and digitalization of our energy systems, Madam.
It is something that we focus a lot on here, because as we work to enhance our systems and truly make them more efficient, make them more cost competitive, you realize that you are also building in another level of vulnerability, if you will. One more area of vulnerability that I want to bring up, and I speak to a lot here in this committee. Some years ago, when we were more reliant on other nations for our sources of oil. We talked about that vulnerability, and it was not only energy vulnerability, but vulnerability from a security perspective, a national security perspective. Well, as you have pointed out, we're in a much better situation now, certainly with regards to oil and natural gas, and that undisputed position that you now refer to around the world coming from the United States. But there is another area where I see a growing vulnerability on others, and that is as it relates to our critical minerals and our resources, the resources that we need to help build out, whether it is wind turbines, whether it's the lithium for the lithium-ion batteries. The reality that whether it's lithium, graphite, cobalt, nickel, these are what will allow us to help build out the battery, the storage capacity, that when we're talking about electrification, moving to EV, electric vehicles, we have to have these sources. So I view that as a bottleneck, a potential bottleneck that will allow us to make this this transition, or these move to these other areas that you have referenced. You referred to them as upheavals with what we're seeing with renewables. Can you speak a little bit about that aspect of vulnerability and where you see the direction or the trend here?
Another excellent point, Madam Chair, if I may say so. With on the traditional fuel sources, oil and gas, the energy security is more or less well understood, and mechanisms are there. For oil and gas, we have been, as I working many years, and especially for natural gas, with the G7 meeting in Japan, we were asked by Prime Minister Abe to look after the gas security issue, which we are doing, and electricity security. I mentioned to you, very important cyber security. We are working on that. Yet another security issue, indirectly, but also very important in terms of energy, is the raw materials for the clean energy technologies. This goes from aluminum to copper, copper to lithium, manganese, and it happens that, again, like the issue of the traditional energy sources several years ago, these are concentrated only a few number of countries. And again, here, a concentration of the resources. Some of them are in Latin America, some Latin American countries, here, Chile, Peru, Bolivia. But China happens to be a country with a lot of reserves in that context. So it is when we talk about the clean energy technologies, this is very good. This is good for the environment, good for the domestic production. But one has to perhaps go one step further to think about where those raw materials will come from, and what kind of security mechanisms we can develop in order to address if some undesired problems arise, as the raw materials of those technologies are concentrated only in a few number of countries. It's an area that it's very important.
Does IEA not concentrate necessarily, but do you factor in these vulnerabilities as you look to your world forecasts?
We mainly look at these vulnerabilities in terms of energy sources, oil, gas, electricity, and renewables, but these are also important areas that needs further attention.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, I appreciate that. Senator Smith, further questions?
No. I think I don't have any further questions. I'd just like to thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Birol, for your comments. This is quite interesting, and I'm very happy to be a part of this committee.
Well, we are delighted that you are a part of the committee. I've got one final question for you, Dr. Birol, before we conclude. And again, I thank you for your time this morning. I have long maintained that that nuclear in this country and part of our energy portfolio is significant, important, and we have seen the United States and our role with nuclear kind of, in my view, slack off in recent years. We've got one remaining construction project in nuclear, the Vogtle plant in Georgia, but you have indicated in your comments here this morning that China is coming on in a quite considerable and a substantial way. We've got the traditional nuclear in the global marketplace. We also have the role of advanced nuclear, and I think we're seeing some positive signs coming out recently in terms of these emerging technologies and how they might factor in to the energy marketplace. But can you just share with the committee your view of how nuclear here in the United States factors in these out years, whether it be traditional nuclear or the advanced nuclear opportunities?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I think nuclear is a technology worldwide which can provide electricity uninterrupted without emitting carbon dioxide emissions. But after Fukushima, it became a challenge in many countries to build new nuclear power plants. The challenge is not only there, challenge is also in the financing part of the equation to build new nuclear power plants. And even some countries, like in the United States, where the electricity demand is low, where the gas prices are low, where the renewables are growing, to find even getting electricity generation from nuclear is a big challenge, unless governments don't take any measures. So for the new builds, in my view, it will be very difficult to go with the traditional nuclear power plants. Small modular reactors can provide the opportunity to address the project management risks and the financing problems. So this can be a solution. If I go and I believe nuclear can play in US and in the countries where it is accepted, can play important role for energy security and also for the environmental issues, can make a positive contribution. There is one more issue globally. As I said, as you also mentioned, in the US we are building one only nuclear power plant. In Europe, the situation is similar. In Japan, it is similar. These countries were the main nuclear technology exporters until recently. But since they don't build any nuclear power plants, they are forgetting how to build it. And China and Russia are building a lot of nuclear power plants, and they will not only build nuclear power plants at home, but they may well be the countries who are exporting the nuclear technology to other countries, which is, I think, important from not only from energy perspective, but from other perspectives as well. So we have to look at the nuclear also perhaps from that angle as well, that the established nuclear technology exporters such as US and the Europeans and the others are facing strong challenge from China and Russia for the other countries to build nuclear power plants.
When you think about where nuclear has dominated, and again here in the United States, in Europe, certainly in Japan, that reversal in a very, very short order, really, in terms of the energy spectrum worldwide, and now moving that over to China and Russia, where we hadn't seen that much of a significant presence. It's really kind of an interesting phenomenon that it has moved as quickly and as, I would say dramatically, as it has in terms of moving the energy. Kind of talking off the top of my head here, but I wonder if an increased role and presence in Russia, in China particularly, will promote or spur the United States to renew its efforts within the nuclear space, or whether we continue to cede and take a back seat. It's not something that I think has been good. I greatly appreciate the role that nuclear plays in providing for not only a reliable power source, but a clean power source. And I regret that we are losing the skilled workforce, the level of leadership that we have played, not only from the production perspective, but how we then export the technologies and the smart people that come behind them. Do you think that we change, or with low natural gas prices, we just continue in the direction that we are?
I think natural gas is, of course, very good. It is cheap. Renewables are also getting cheaper. But in my view, having a diversification and nuclear position of nuclear in the U.S., which is a strong one, to keep that position is wise policy. I wouldn't let it go, but of course, up to your government and yourself to pursue that policy. But it will be regrettable, in my view. United States has been one of the leaders of nuclear technology years and years. Industry has been developed in this country in the 1980s. To give it up, that position may not be the best way, in my personal view.
Do you see Europe going back to more nuclear, or is that an irreversible direction?
I think in many countries, irreversible direction, but I think Japan is going back slowly, the nuclear power, but the biggest developments coming from China and India. More than 90% of the new nuclear power plants coming in the picture in the next years will come from China and India, and built there, and the Russians are building in Europe and elsewhere several nuclear power plants. Is by building a lot of nuclear power plants, they are bringing the cost down and making it cheaper, accessible to emerging countries. So it is, in my view, an energy issue, but maybe not only.
Yeah. One last question. I said that my last one was going to be nuclear, but you prompted another, and that's regards to India.
Yes.
You've focused a lot of your comments today on the role that China is playing in the world energy markets. Will India move more towards natural gas, towards coal, towards nuclear? Where do you see their energy portfolio?
I think India chooses a policy which is all of the technologies type of policy, and they are pushing especially natural gas strongly, and once again to replace coal. But coal is also growing, because in India, the Senator Smith mentioned people having no access to electricity in India. Almost 200 million people have no access to electricity. They have to build some power plants from coal, but also more and more natural gas, renewable energy, and nuclear. They are pushing in all fronts. And to be very frank, the Modi government is pursuing an energy policy which is very good for their people, because in a very short period of time, almost 11 years, they are bringing electricity to about 500 million people. It's a big achievement. And they are using gas, they are using coal, they are using renewables, all of these technologies. Much more diverse, and I expect the share of gas will increase significantly in India in the next years to come.
Well, very interesting, and I will look forward to learning more from this report that you referenced earlier that will focus on those nations that perhaps have greater vulnerabilities because they are more reliant on a single energy resource, either for production or for their consumption, and what that means. So it's interesting to hear that with India, it truly is one of those all of the above approaches to energy. I truly appreciate what you have shared with the committee. It's always good, it's very important for us to understand what is happening with the global energy and the trends out there. As one who has been a strong proponent of U.S. energy production, certainly within oil and gas, it makes me feel pretty good, actually, to hear you say that of the four upheavals that you have referenced, the first one is the U.S. Being a leader in oil and gas production. As I say, just in the few years that I have been here in the Senate and serving on this committee, we have gone from a perspective of discussion about LNG import terminals to now export terminals, to a vulnerability and a reliance for our oil on countries that we don't like and they don't like us, and now we are truly in the driver's seat. So that is significant. But I think it also is very important for this committee to hear very clearly the other areas that you have identified, that the cost of renewables are moving quickly, and that the direction that is being taken and the advances in solar and wind, the fact that they are getting to that point where they can stand on their own and be cost competitive, that factors in mightily in terms of the direction that we move from a policy perspective. And paying attention to what is happening in the world, the leadership of China. It's been very easy for us to say that China is the big polluter out there, but when they are advancing policies that are really keyed in on cleaner energy and energy sources, and whether that is, again, importing LNG that may come from a place like Alaska or from elsewhere, but to recognize their leadership in nuclear. And then also your fourth point about the share of electricity growing faster than the other sectors, and the implications then that portends. So a lot to think about as we begin the new year, but thank you for your insight, for your guidance. We look forward to learning more from you about these very important geopolitical issues in the energy space. You've been most helpful. You've been generous with your time. We wish you safe travels back when you return to France. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. With that,